Thank you so much for everyone for tuning in today. We've got a really terrific virtual press briefing for you put on by Issue One's National Council on Election Integrity, along with Citizens for a Strong Democracy and the National Task Force on Election Crises. My name is Michael Beckel, and I'm part of the communications team here at Issue One. And we've got 5 terrific speakers with us today on the press briefing. We've got former Secretary of Homeland Security and former Governor of Arizona, Janet Napolitano. We've also got former Secretary of Homeland Security, Michael Chertoff. We've also got retired Admiral Bill Owens, who is a former Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the second most senior military officer in the United States. We've also got former Governor Tom Kean of New Jersey, who was the chairman of the 9/11 Commission, and former Ambassador Tim Roemer, a Democrat from Indiana, who was a congressman from Indiana and also a member of the 9/11 Commission. So again, thank you to everybody for tuning in today. If you have any questions at any point, please use the Q&A or chat function here within Zoom, and we will do questions at the end of our programming. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Secretary Napolitano.
Well, thank you, and good morning, everybody. I'm here with this really prestigious panel to talk about the need to actually formally begin the transition process from President Trump to President-elect Biden. I think the election results are clear. The litigation noise that has been filed has proved to be without merit. There have been no findings of any sort of widespread fraud that would undercut this election. The voters have spoken, and the view of the voters must be respected. And it's important from a national security perspective. It's important that the president-elect begin to receive the intelligence that's part of the president's daily brief, so that even though he is well informed based on his own experience about the intelligence posture of the United States, there is no doubt new information that has been developed over the past 4 years that he needs to know about to make sure that nothing falls through the cracks as he prepares to take office. From a national security perspective, it's also important that the transition begins so that members of the president-elect's security team can become identified, can themselves get to be part of the transition process, and so that their confirmations can move with alacrity once the next version of the Senate is in place. All of this kind of disruption and not following the statute that governs presidential transitions is causing so much unnecessary disruption and increasing the risks to our country. So we're here today to say the election is over. The votes are in. It's time for the transition to begin.
Thank you so much, Secretary Napolitano. Next up, we've got Secretary Michael Chertoff.
Thank you, Michael. Well, I fully agree with everything that Janet Napolitano said. And in fact, we worked together when we moved from the Bush administration to the Obama administration. And she succeeded me as Secretary of DHS. We made sure there was a smooth transition. President Bush insisted on it. President Obama welcomed it. And the idea was to avoid any gap in security that might be exploited by our enemies. Some of the speakers, like Governor Kean and Ambassador Roemer, will reinforce the message that we paid something of a price on September 11th for delays in getting the transition started because of the Bush-Gore litigation, which made it harder to get people in place in time to respond as effectively and as quickly as we might have liked to. The bottom line is our adversaries look at a transition period as a moment of potential weakness, which they will exploit if possible. We could have, for example, North Korea decide it wants to launch welcoming missiles. Perhaps China will be more aggressive with Taiwan. Perhaps Iran will do things to double down on its uranium enrichment. To be able to respond to this effectively, we need to have a smooth handoff, and that can only happen if the outgoing administration cooperates fully in a transition with the incoming administration, briefs them with the intelligence, gets people with security clearances on board, gets people at the agency level in the Department of Defense, Homeland Security, and Justice to welcome and brief their incoming successors. Only that minimizes the risk that our guard will be down during a period of a couple of months that may have some elevated risk. We are all Americans first. As Janet said, the election is over. All Americans, whether they be members of Congress, Republicans, Democrats, wherever they may live, or to join in unison in making it clear to the Trump administration that the time for playing games and posturing is over. We ought to get the security briefings underway. We ought to formally initiate the transition because the clock is ticking and we don't have a lot of time to waste. So we encourage everybody to get out there and demand that we honor the constitutional process of a peaceful and efficient transition of power.
Thank you so much, Secretary Chertoff, for your remarks. Next up, we've got Admiral Bill Owens.
Well, hello, friends. I come at this in a similar way to Secretary Napolitano and Secretary Chertoff, except my background is one of 35 years in the military. And I would just tell you that when we were young officers in the military, we were voting officers, we assured our troops of the certainty of the electoral process. We talked about the democracy and what the process meant to us and about the smooth transition of government and how important it was to us. Later, when I was very senior on the Joint Chiefs of Staff, we made certain that as much as we could, that the votes came in, that they were appropriately counted, that they were adequately received by the states, and we took it very seriously. These are the couple million military people out there around the world. We owe this to them. They're special people. They're our sons and daughters. They're great Americans. We also, in the military, spent a lot of our time overseas. And so I have lived 8 years in China, and I've lived 4 years in Europe. And I can tell you that everyone watches us as we are the beacon of democracy. And to watch this process and the smooth transition go every year, every electoral year, smoothly is extremely important to the perception America has as this beacon of democracy. Our elections have always meant a smooth transition of power, and our strength is in the fact that we do represent this great democracy, and we all have agreed to accept the final outcome and move forward. That stability is the source of our strength and the continuity of our democracy. Disrupting the continuity of that US government transition is stunning, I think, for our troops. It's also stunning for leaders around the world and the perception of our country. And I wonder if we don't get on with this, how we will get it back. How do we recover it? It's precious. We need to protect it every way we can. More than a week has passed since the presidential race was called, and our president-elect still has not received a daily PDB, presidential daily briefing. as Secretary Chertoff talked about so effectively, that and the transition of the team and the security clearances for the team are terribly important. I pray that we can get on with this in the way that America deserves, in a way that the troops deserve, and remain that beacon of democracy that we have always been.
Thank you so much for your remarks, Admiral Owens. Next up, we've got Governor Kane.
Good morning. My job was, as chairman of the 9/11 Commission, to work with 5 Democrats and 5 Republicans to hopefully come up with a nonpartisan finding as to the facts that happened on that terrible day. And then, just maybe even more importantly, recommendations to make sure that this would never, ever happen to our country again. And that's the job we did. We made 41 recommendations. Some of them weren't easy, but almost all of them were enacted. Some of them were very controversial. Some of them took 10 years. One of them was not controversial. And that was the recommendation that we look at transitions as a very vulnerable time. We put national security personnel first, and that we work with the Congress to make sure that those people are confirmed ahead of time so that they're in place. The worst thing can happen in a time of vulnerability is to have some of those offices vacant, which happened in the Bush Gore thing for a while, or have some of those offices not briefed, so they don't know what they're doing. That's a national risk. That's the risk to this country. That's the risk we can't afford to take. As best I remember, I don't think there was a single member of Congress who disagreed with that recommendation. Certainly the people were for it, and because it made sense. So what we're asking today is that we move on, that we get together, that we put the national security people in place, that they are giving the briefing they're entitled to, that the new president is given the security briefings he's entitled to, so that we don't have a period of vulnerability. So our enemies don't get a chance to do something bad to us. Because they're looking right now as we're talking, they're looking and figuring, is this the time? Is this the time to do something? And so this is national security. Nothing to do with Republicans or Democrats or anything else. It's all of us moving together as one and getting this job done the way it should be. So we got to move, particularly in the national security area, we got to move forward with this. And we should frankly move forward with it yesterday.
Terrific, terrific. Thank you so much, Governor Kane, for those remarks. Next up, we've got Ambassador Tim Romer.
Thank you, Michael. And I'm honored to join with this very distinguished panel to talk about this critical subject matter. We have foreign leaders around the world calling to congratulate President-elect Joe Biden on the people's vote to have him be the next president of the United States. Our own government should not be the last to recognize the outcome of this election. We need a smooth transition and an orderly transition to begin to take place. Why do we need that? As Chairman Kane said so eloquently, we found on the 9/11 Commission, and I will refer to it, that several deputy cabinet officials in the Bush administration were not in place until spring of 2001. And then many critical sub-cabinet, the deputy cabinet officials didn't get in until the springtime, and critical sub-cabinet officials were not confirmed until the summer, if then. Some of them were not even in place yet. We elect our presidents to 4-year terms, not 3.5 years of serving the American people. And we cannot afford to have the next several weeks be a tardy transition, or not have key national security people in place in the next 6 months or 9 months. We lost 3,000 people on 9/11. We've already lost close to 250,000 Americans due to a health pandemic. We are right in the midst of that. So our new president should be getting the kind of briefings in the intelligence community that prepare him and the vice president, not only for the COVID crisis, but the potential for, as Janet and Mike both talked about, the potential for cyber attacks or terror attacks, the briefings on what's going on in North Korea and Iran, what kinds of aggressive postures China and Russia may be taking today. Those presidential daily briefs need to take place right away. And the GSA needs to sign the certification to allow the transition to begin. What are the consequences if we don't? There are 3 stages to a tardy and lurching transition. One is harmful to the new administration. Secondly, it is damaging to the democracy the longer it goes on. And thirdly, it can be catastrophic for our national security. So echoing my friends on this panel, let's have Democrats and Republicans come together. Let's have a smooth and orderly transition take place. Let's protect the national security interests of our country, and let's move forward as a country together.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Romer. Certainly, the 3 organizations on this call have been doing a lot of work in this arena, and there's other organizations that have been doing so as well. For instance, the Center for Presidential Transitions has noted that the new administration will quickly be required to prepare a $4.7 trillion budget, develop a strong policy agenda, recruit 4,000 political appointees, including more than 1,200 that require Senate confirmation, and the new administration will assume leadership of a workforce of 2 million civilian employees and 2 million active duty and reserve troops. Can one of the panelists speak to the importance of what happens between now and Inauguration Day to help that planning and transition go smoothly?
Yeah, I'll jump in. In an orderly transition, the outgoing administration has already prepared materials for an incoming administration. And the incoming administration has identified members of agency review teams, as the Biden team already has done, who are prepared to meet with agency personnel to receive the briefings. And then as the president-elect designates his cabinet nominees, those nominees then meet with the relevant secretary that they will be succeeding. This is exactly what happened between me and Michael Chertoff to get another high-level briefing or series of briefings so that there is a smooth transition. There are things you need to know. You need to know things like pending litigation deadlines, regulatory deadlines. What's the status of the budget? What's the status of personnel? What initiatives are being contemplated? What are going to be put on hold? And for the security agencies like the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security, you need to know what is the security posture of the United States? What are the threats that the government is looking at and preparing for? What does the intelligence say? So those are a few of the things that should be happening during this interim period.
Michael, I'll jump in too. Janet and Mike won't say it, but they were the gold standard for transitions. The transition from the Bush administration to the Obama administration was the gold standard for all of us to look to have the plan in place and to try to copy that plan and emulate that plan. We cannot afford a silver standard or a bronze standard or dropping the baton. This needs to take place as smoothly and as in an orderly fashion as we can do, because the threats are multiple. Government is very big and complex. The presidency has enormous responsibilities. The world is more volatile than ever before. And we need this transition process to prepare the kind of people that are coming in, not only at the cabinet level like Janet and Mike, but at the deputy and the sub-cabinet levels, so that policy is done, we're preparing and implementing things and get going on the ground running from the first day.
Terrific, terrific. And a reminder to all the reporters on the call, if you've got questions, please put them into either the chat or the Q&A. We've got a couple additional questions, so we'll start fielding those. But if you've got more, please do put them into the chat or into the Q&A. The first question we've got is, who, in your judgment, among those in authority in the government right now, in the Trump administration, has the primary responsibility to intervene with President Trump and force the transition? Would any of the panelists be able to speak to that, and who, what persons could help that process get started?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the GSA administrator has a legal obligation to sign the paperwork that begins what they call ascertainment, which authorizes this to go forward. And I don't really think there's any excuse for her not doing so. In terms of the administration, I don't know that there's anybody left who stands up to Donald Trump within the White House. But I do think that senior members of Congress, Mitch McConnell, the chair of the Intelligence Committee, the chair of the Defense Committee, ought to go and say, this has to get done. And a number of them have spoken out, but you really got to put your foot down on this.
Great, great. Any other panelists want to speak to that question?
The only point I would make is that it is not necessary for President Trump to concede for the GSA administrator to do her job, which frankly is a fairly ministerial one, which is to sign a piece of paper that ascertains that there is an apparent winner of the election, and that person is Joe Biden. And that then triggers a lot of the activities that we've been speaking about.
Great, thank you. Thank you for reiterating that point as well. The next question we have is, could one of the panelists please address what options the Biden team has as the lack of a cooperative transition continues? If the Trump administration remains on its current path, what are the top issues likely to arise if the transition is not able to happen in a smooth and efficient manner in January 2021?
Well, I would just say that I think that there aren't many options other than total preparation by the Biden team. And the national security side of that team, the defense side, the intelligence side, Homeland Security side, need to be thinking about and talking about all of these issues, as one would hope, and I expect that they are. But the options, unless this is opened, as my friends on the panel have said, are pretty limited. You either are into these special programs and you know what's going on, as Secretary Chertoff said about Taiwan or about China or about North Korea, or you don't know what's going on yesterday or the day before, or messages that came back and forth. So I think that's one of the reasons this is absolutely mandatory, that the transition is allowed to move forward with the GSA approval.
Yeah,
Michael, Tom, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I'm fortunate or unfortunate to be one of the few people, I guess, outside of government who got to read a bunch of presidential daily briefings from both the Clinton administration and the Bush administration. And let me tell you, they focus on the real problems. They focus on information nobody else has, because nobody else has a stream of intelligence coming in. They give the best thinking to government as to what's ahead next year, what's ahead the year after. What are our enemies plotting, and how are they plotting to do it? What are the eventualities you've got to be ready for? It's criminal, frankly, not to have a new administration have that information, and to have it soon so they can act on it. This will be the best information that our intelligence agency has been able to put together over the last 4 years. An incoming administration has to have it because it's vital for the safety of the American people.
And I would simply add to Tom's remarks that as a former member of Congress from Indiana, and I also served on the Intelligence Committee, it used to be not that long ago that issues like national security and presidential daily briefs and smooth transitions were entirely bipartisan. This was not any kind of controversial issue. This is something that Democrats and Republicans held hands on, and if there was an objection to it, people on both sides of the aisle would speak up and demand that something be done. And as Mike Chertoff has said, we need the Republicans, both in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate, to tell the current president of the United States that providing for this transition is for the best interests of our republic, that is going to ensure the safety of our American citizens. And it is the kind of thing that George Washington was not just famous for what he did in our country when he was president, but how he exited and how he left with grace and how he became a civilian. And these lessons are so important, I think, right now to all Americans, and Republicans, I hope will speak up louder on this issue.
We've got.
Let me chip in with one other example where the need to already be communicating information from the outgoing and the incoming administration is so very important. And that's the issue of the COVID vaccine. And what the current administration has underway in terms of an implementation plan for distribution of a vaccine. So we're now hearing positive news from Pfizer, from Moderna about their early trials. It looks like we may have a vaccine, but how it's going to be distributed and the supply chain for that distribution, that's information that the current administration has that needs to be shared with the incoming administration so they can move with all speed to get that vaccine out to the American people.
Terrific, terrific. We've got one final question here. We want to be cognizant of the time, but we've got one other question that came in that says, what conclusion should the American people draw from the failure of elected Republicans to acknowledge the reality of these risks and to address them immediately and unequivocally?
Well, I would just say, as someone who tries to stay apolitical as a former senior military person, that one of the conclusions that we should take as Americans is that we have dealt with very difficult issues over the last hundreds of years, wars and plagues and other crises we've had. And we somehow seem to come out of it. And we need to have a lot of faith in our country as we go through even this. And I would hope that we would put pressure on our congressmen and women so that they're not voting as a bloc, so that they don't pledge to support the Constitution like military do, and they go back to Washington and they vote as a bloc. And so I think none of us like that very much. We vote our consciences. We vote for the people who elected us. And I pray that the Republicans and the Democrats will stand up to that constitutional pledge that they all took when they went into office.
And Michael, I would just say, on a note of optimism and hope, that echoing Admiral Owens' comments, we have done this throughout our time. We have come together across the aisle. We did this 10 years ago and 12 years ago. We saw the Obama and the Bush administration cooperate seamlessly and almost perfectly to do this before. This past election, while we are divided as a country and we have tribal disagreements at times, this does not need to be one of them. Our national security and dealing with 250,000 dead Americans and trying to prevent another 100,000 deaths in a smoother transition should be something in all of our interests moving forward.
Wonderful, wonderful. Any other panelists want to make any other final closing remarks? Well, thank you so much to all of our esteemed panelists for joining us. And on behalf of Issue 1 and the National Council on Election Integrity, the National Task Force on Election Crises, and Citizens for a Strong Democracy, we thank everyone for tuning in today to join this press briefing. And you can find more about each of those organizations online. And thank you so much for everyone for their great questions. And again, thank you so much to all of our panelists for sharing your time and your wisdom with us today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.